A retired teacher in Ohio lives on $3,800 a month and never touches her savings. A couple in Arizona discovers their paid-off house is worth more to them than an extra $600,000 in their portfolio. A 67-year-old in Florida realizes his pension checks are mathematically equivalent to owning a seven-figure bond portfolio he never had to build. Meanwhile, a tech executive with $2.3 million feels constantly anxious about running out of money. The teacher sleeps like a baby. The executive wakes up at 3 a.m. checking his Schwab balance. Something doesn't add up here. Why do some retirees with modest account statements feel genuinely wealthy while others with seven figures feel one market crash away from disaster? Here's what I'm going to explain today. The 5 specific types of retirees who are dramatically richer than they realize, and why conventional financial metrics are systematically failing to capture their real wealth. This matters because the retirement industry has convinced everyone that account balance equals financial security when the actual math tells a completely different story. The wealth you have and the wealth you feel are two entirely different calculations, and understanding that gap is where real financial peace comes from. Let me introduce you to what I call the invisible portfolio. You know how companies have tangible assets like factories and inventory, but also intangible assets like brand value and intellectual property? The accountants spend countless hours trying to value the intangibles because they know a company's real worth isn't just what you can see on the balance sheet. Retirees work the same way. Everyone obsesses over the visible portfolio, the 401k balance, the IRA, the brokerage account. But the invisible portfolio includes things like eliminated expenses, guaranteed income streams, tax efficiency, spending flexibility, and psychological resilience. These invisible assets generate real, measurable value every single month, but nobody puts them on a statement. Nobody sends you a quarterly report showing that your paid-off mortgage is functionally equivalent to owning a $600,000 annuity. So retirees walk around feeling poorer than they actually are, making bad decisions based on incomplete information. The first type of retiree who's richer than they think is the mortgage-free homeowner. And I know what you're thinking. Of course, not having a mortgage is good. Everyone knows that. But I don't think you understand just how dramatically it changes your wealth equation. Let me tell you about Gerald. Gerald spent 32 years as a mid-level manager at a manufacturing company in Indiana. He retired in 2023 with a 401k worth $420,000 and a pension of $1,800 a month. On paper, Gerald looked like he might struggle. His financial advisor told him he needed at least $1 million to retire comfortably, and here he was with less than half that. The advisor showed him terrifying Monte Carlo simulations predicting a 63% chance of failure if he maintained his current spending. But Gerald had something the simulations missed. His house was paid off, no more mortgage payment of $2,200 a month. That's $26,400 a year in eliminated housing costs. Now here's where the math gets interesting. Using what's called the safe withdrawal rate of 4%, which is what most retirement calculators use, how much would you need in your portfolio to generate $26,400 a year? That's $660,000. Gerald's paid-off house was functionally equivalent to having an extra $660,000 in his portfolio, except better. Because unlike a portfolio that can crash 30% in a bad year, his eliminated mortgage payment never fluctuates. It's guaranteed savings every single month until he dies or sells the house. When you add that invisible $660,000 to his visible $420,000, suddenly Gerald has the equivalent of over $1 million in retirement wealth. His probability of success jumps from 37% to over 90%. Same person, same accounts, completely different financial reality once you account for the invisible portfolio. But wait, there's more. Gerald's house has appreciated from the $180,000 he paid in 1994 to roughly $310,000 today. That's real equity he can tap if needed through a reverse mortgage, a home equity line of credit, or by downsizing. And unlike stocks, which can underperform inflation for decades, just ask anyone who bought the S&P 500 in 2000 and waited 13 years to break even. Residential real estate has historically kept pace with or exceeded inflation over long periods. Gerald essentially owns an inflation hedge that also provides him a place to sleep. Now, you might be thinking, sure, but what if property taxes and maintenance eat up those savings? Valid question. Gerald pays about $4,200 a year in property taxes and budgets another $6,000 for maintenance. That's $10,200 annually in housing costs, compared to $36,600 if he still had his mortgage, plus the same taxes and maintenance. He's still ahead $26,400 a year. The math holds. The second type of retiree who's richer than they think is what I call the naturally frugal spender. This one frustrates financial advisors more than any other because these retirees break all the rules and somehow come out fine. I heard about a woman named Hilda through a friend who's a financial planner. Hilda was a school teacher her entire career. Retired at 65 with a pension of $1,900 a month and Social Security of roughly the same amount, total guaranteed monthly income $3,800. Her investment accounts? A 403b worth $75,000 and about $100,000 in savings. Investable assets under $200,000. By conventional metrics, Hilda should be struggling. Here's the thing though. Hilda's monthly expenses were about $3,000. She lived in a modest neighborhood in a house she'd paid off years ago. She cooked at home, didn't travel much, and found joy in her community, her garden, and helping raise her grandchildren. Her lifestyle was fulfilled and meaningful to her. She never touched her savings, not once. That $200,000 sat there growing for decades, providing a cushion she never needed to use. Now you might say, well, that was years ago. Inflation makes that impossible today. But Hilda's story isn't about the specific numbers, it's about the principle. She needed $3,800 a month in income and had $3,800 a month in guaranteed checks. Her savings were pure insurance, not income. Her withdrawal rate was effectively zero. Do you know how long a portfolio lasts when your withdrawal rate is zero? Forever. Mathematically, forever. Meanwhile, I've met retirees with $1.5 million who feel constantly stressed. Why? Because they've built a lifestyle that requires $8,000 a month to maintain. Country club dues, 2 car payments, travel they don't even enjoy that much, a bigger house than they need. Their withdrawal rate is higher than Hilda's even though their portfolio is 7 times larger. They're one extended market downturn away from genuine anxiety. Hilda sleeps soundly every night. The financial industry loves to focus on the accumulation phase, how much you've saved, what your target number should be. But the decumulation phase, how much you actually spend, matters just as much if not more. A retiree who needs $40,000 a year to be happy has a fundamentally different wealth requirement than one who needs $100,000. Yet both are told they need $1 million to retire. It's absurd. Here's a concrete example. 2 retirees, identical portfolios of $800,000. Retiree A needs $60,000 a year to live. Retiree B needs $40,000. Using the 4% rule, retiree A can safely withdraw $32,000, meaning they're short $28,000 a year. They need additional income sources, or they're eating into principal too fast. Retiree B can safely withdraw $32,000 and only needs $40,000, meaning they're short just $8,000. Retiree B's shortfall is 1/3 the size of retiree A's. Same portfolio, completely different financial trajectories. But you might be thinking, sure, but who wants to live on $40,000 a year? That sounds miserable. And that right there is the psychological trap. Spending isn't just about numbers. It's about what economists call the marginal utility of consumption. The first $40,000 you spend covers essentials, housing, food, healthcare, basic transportation. Every dollar beyond that buys less additional happiness than the previous dollar. Research from Princeton found that emotional well-being plateaus around $75,000 in annual income, though that number is probably closer to $100,000 today with inflation. The point is, the relationship between spending and happiness isn't linear. Hilda found her sweet spot at $36,000 a year. Some people need more, some need less. But the industry treats everyone like they need to replace 100% of their pre-retirement income, which is nonsense. The third type of retiree who's richer than they think is the pension holder. And this one's fascinating because people with pensions consistently undervalue them, while people without pensions obsess over getting one. Picture 2 retirees. Margaret has a pension that pays her $3,000 a month for life, with a cost of living adjustment tied to inflation. Stephen has a portfolio worth $900,000. Who's richer? Trick question. They're roughly equivalent. Here's the math. To generate $36,000 a year using a safe withdrawal rate of 4%, you'd need a portfolio of $900,000. Margaret's pension is mathematically equivalent to having a $900,000 portfolio, except better in some ways and worse in others. Better because the pension checks keep coming regardless of what the market does. Margaret doesn't have to worry about sequence of returns risk, the danger that a market crash early in retirement devastates your portfolio before it can recover. Her income is guaranteed for life. Worse, because she can't leave the principal to her heirs, and the pension stops when she dies unless she took a survivor benefit, which would have reduced the monthly payment. But here's what's interesting. The Federal Reserve estimates that only about 15% of private sector workers still have access to traditional pensions. The rest of us are on our own with our 401ks and IRAs, trying to build what Margaret got automatically. Yet I've met pension holders who feel financially insecure because they only have $200,000 in savings, not realizing their pension is worth more than that entire amount in portfolio terms. There's a concept called pension equivalency, and it's criminally underused in retirement planning. A pension of $2,500 a month is worth $600,000 at a 5% capitalization rate. A pension of $4,000 a month is worth nearly $1 million. These are massive assets that don't show up on any net worth statement because they're not liquid. You can't withdraw a lump sum from most pensions, but you can't withdraw a lump sum from your left kidney either, and it's still valuable to you. The fourth type of retiree who's richer than they think is the tax-efficient income planner. This one requires understanding how taxation in retirement actually works, which almost nobody does because it's deliberately confusing. Quick story. A couple I heard about, let's call them Tom and Linda, are planning to retire in 5 years at age 60. They've done a great job saving $60,000 in cash, $50,000 in a brokerage account, $2 million in pre-tax retirement accounts, and $450,000 in Roth IRAs. Solid numbers. But their advisor had been pushing them to do Roth conversions while they're still working, which sounds smart on the surface. Convert pre-tax money to Roth, pay the taxes now at a lower rate than you might in retirement, enjoy tax-free withdrawals later. Here's the problem. Conversions require paying taxes on the full amount being converted, the original contributions plus all the growth that's happened. It's like being a farmer who can choose to pay taxes either on a small bag of seeds or on the full harvest after you've grown everything. Paying taxes on the seeds is almost always cheaper because you're being taxed on potential rather than results. What Tom and Linda weren't doing was maximizing their Roth contributions during their working years. They both had access to Roth 401ks through their employers, which have no income limits, but they were only contributing to traditional pre-tax accounts. They were choosing to be taxed on the harvest instead of the seeds. This is backwards. Every dollar in a Roth account in retirement is a dollar you can spend without worrying about tax implications. Every dollar in a pre-tax account is a dollar you can spend minus whatever the tax rate happens to be that year. And here's where it gets really interesting. Retirees who strategically manage their taxable income can unlock massive savings through what's called the tax wedge. If you keep your income below certain thresholds, you qualify for lower tax brackets, reduced Medicare premiums, and in some cases, subsidized health care through the Affordable Care Act marketplace before Medicare kicks in at 65. A retiree who manages to stay in the 12% tax bracket instead of the 22% bracket keeps an extra 10 cents of every dollar withdrawn. That's equivalent to earning an extra 10% on your investments without taking any additional risk. Let me give you some numbers. A married couple filing jointly in 2025 can have up to about $94,000 in taxable income while staying in the 12% bracket. Above that, they jump to 22%. But here's what most people miss. Taxable income isn't the same as gross income. Deductions matter. A couple with $120,000 in total income might have a standard deduction of $29,000, bringing their taxable income to $91,000. They're still in the 12% bracket. Strategic withdrawals from Roth accounts, which don't count as taxable income, can keep you in lower brackets while still funding your lifestyle. The fifth type of retiree who's richer than they think is the flexible adapter. This one isn't about numbers on a spreadsheet. It's about psychological orientation toward uncertainty. The retirement planning industry operates on what I call the rigidity assumption. They calculate exactly how much you need, assume you'll spend exactly that amount every year until you die, and build in a margin of safety for market fluctuations. But life doesn't work that way. Expenses vary. Healthcare costs spike and then stabilize. Travel peaks in the early retirement years and declines as mobility decreases. House repairs come in lumps, not smooth monthly payments. Retirees who can adapt, who can cut spending during market downturns, who can downsize if needed, who can relocate to a lower cost area, who can take a part-time job if the portfolio takes a hit. These retirees have a massive advantage. Their required portfolio size is smaller because they have what economists call option value. The ability to change course is itself a financial asset. Here's a mini case study that makes this concrete. Imagine two retirees, both 65, both with $700,000 portfolios, both planning to withdraw $30,000 a year to supplement Social Security. Retiree number one has a rigid budget. $30,000 is the minimum they need to maintain their lifestyle. Their fixed costs are $24,000, their discretionary spending is $6,000, and they're unwilling to compromise on either. Retiree number two has a flexible budget. Essential costs are $18,000, and they've categorized their discretionary spending into tiers: travel at $6,000, dining out at $3,000, hobbies at $3,000. They can reduce discretionary spending to $3,000 in a bad year if needed, bringing total withdrawals to $21,000. Now, imagine a market crash in year 2 of retirement, a 30% drop in portfolio value. Retiree number 1's $700,000 is now $490,000. They need to withdraw $30,000, which is a 6.1% withdrawal rate on the reduced portfolio. That's dangerously high. Historical research shows that withdrawal rates above 5% significantly increase the risk of running out of money over a 30-year retirement. Retiree number 2 withdraws $21,000 instead. That's a 4.3% withdrawal rate on the reduced portfolio. Much more sustainable. Both retirees experienced the same market crash. Both had identical starting portfolios, but retiree number 2's flexibility turned a potential crisis into a manageable situation. That flexibility is a form of wealth that never appears on any statement. Let me tell you about a concept called geographic arbitrage. I know a guy called him Marcus who retired from his corporate job in San Francisco in 2024. He owned a condo worth about $1.2 million with $300,000 left on the mortgage. His retirement accounts totaled around $800,000. By Bay Area standards, he was middle class, maybe even slightly below average for a retiree his age. Marcus sold his condo, paid off the mortgage, and moved to a small city in Tennessee. He bought a nice house for $350,000. After transaction costs, he had about $500,000 left over from the home sale. He invested that money in a diversified portfolio. So his total investable assets went from $800,000 to $1.3 million. His housing costs dropped from $4,500 a month mortgage, property taxes, insurance, HOA fees, to about $1,100 a month for property taxes and insurance on his new place. That's a savings of $40,000 a year. At a 4% withdrawal rate, that's equivalent to having an extra $1 million in his portfolio. Marcus effectively gave himself a $2 million wealth increase by moving. Same person, same skills, same retirement accounts. He just accessed wealth that was locked in his geographic location. Now, you might be thinking, sure, but I don't want to move. I have friends here, family here, a life here. Totally valid. Geographic arbitrage isn't for everyone. But the point is that flexibility comes in many forms. Maybe you downsize within your current area. Maybe you rent out a room. Maybe you do a reverse mortgage. The specific tactic matters less than the psychological willingness to adapt when circumstances change. By the way, hit subscribe if you like the content. Otherwise, YouTube's algorithm may never show you my videos again. Here's a comedic cutaway for you. Picture a retirement advisor showing a client a Monte Carlo simulation. As you can see, there's a 7% chance you'll be eating fancy feast at age 83. The client panics and adds an extra $50,000 a year to their savings goal, not realizing the simulation assumed they'd maintain a country club membership and lease 2 new cars every 3 years until death. Another cutaway. Imagine someone in 2010 saying, I need $2 million to retire because healthcare costs are exploding. Fast forward to 2025, and they're shocked to discover Medicare covers most of their medical expenses, they're eligible for subsidies, and they never needed that extra million they stressed about for 15 years. Planning is good. Catastrophizing is less good. Let me bring this back to the central idea. The invisible portfolio. You've been told your entire life that wealth equals the number on your statement. That's not even half the story. Your real wealth includes your paid-off mortgage, your guaranteed income streams, your spending efficiency, your tax situation, and your psychological flexibility. These factors can easily add up to the equivalent of another $1 million in assets, but they're invisible to conventional financial planning. So here are 3 practical takeaways. First, calculate your mortgage equivalency. If your housing payment is $2,000 a month, you've effectively got a $600,000 asset at a 4% withdrawal rate. Add that to your net worth calculation and see how you feel. Second, audit your spending not against averages, but against your actual happiness. Every dollar you don't need to spend is a dollar you don't need to save. The gap between your income and your required expenses is your real wealth. Third, if you're still working, diversify your tax exposure. Max out those Roth contributions. You want options in retirement, and every dollar in a Roth account is an option to withdraw without tax consequences. Here's the thing about retirement planning that nobody wants to admit. Most of it is designed to make you feel anxious, so you'll hand over your money to professionals who promise to fix the problem they just convinced you exists. But if you have a paid-off house, reasonable spending, some guaranteed income, tax diversification, and the psychological flexibility to adapt, you're already richer than the industry wants you to believe. Lazy investing built more fortune than crypto memes. And understanding your invisible portfolio will do more for your peace of mind than any Monte Carlo simulation ever could.